Erections change as you get older, but how much change is normal? And how do you know if it's all in your head or a sign of something far more serious? I'm a GP and I've had this conversation with men again and again and again, and time after time I see the same surprise on their face when I tell them exactly what's going on. But for every man who comes in and speaks to me, I know there are thousands who don't. Men who Google desperately and suffer silently, who wonder, will it just go away on its own, or is this the new normal? So in this video, I'm going to tell you what's normal and what's not. Share a case of a man who figured it out, and I think you will too, and show you a plan you can start today. And along the way, I'm going to hit you with the 2 biggest truths about erectile dysfunction that you must take away today. If you can understand how they happen, you'll quickly see why they don't happen, because the machinery to get an erection up and running, it follows a predictable 4-step plan. It starts with a thought, a feeling, or a flicker of desire. That spark comes from the mind and the brain. That signal shoots down the spinal cord and through the nerves to the base of the penis. The inflow valve opens up, arteries widen, blood rushes in, and at the same time the outflow pipes, the veins, they get clamped shut, trapping the blood and building up the pressure. And then there's the oil for the cogs. Testosterone keeps the whole system running. Without it, the spark fizzles and the machine misfires. And if any part of that chain breaks, the spark, the wires, the plumbing, the regulation, then the whole system struggles. But there's one important exception to this rule: morning erections. Most men think these happen because of intimate dreams, but in reality, these erections actually bypass the brain. They're triggered from a different part of the nervous system, a part that's outside your conscious control. And this really matters, and you'll see why in just a minute. But first, what's actually normal? When you're younger, sometimes all it takes is seeing a curvy shape and boom, you're up and you're ready to go. And that's normal. But after the age of 40, things change for every man. So naturally you start wondering, what's normal now? And what's erectile dysfunction? Here's the difference. After 40, your erections might not be as firm or as full as they used to be. You need more stimulation, no just thinking about it. It might take longer to get going. You lose it quicker after climax. And morning erections, well, they still happen, but it might not be every day. Your body's changing. The testosterone levels naturally dip as you get older. Artery walls get a little bit stiffer. The nerves fire a little bit less. So you're not as reactive or overreactive as you once used to be. But the thing is, it still works. Now compare that to erectile dysfunction. This is the consistent or recurrent failure to obtain or maintain an erection that's firm enough for satisfactory sexual activity. That's the line. It's not just slower and a little bit different. There are occasions where it doesn't work, or it's affecting your life. So you're looking out for erections that never get hard enough for sex, losing it halfway through again and again, no morning or masturbation erections at all, complete loss of sex drive, new pain, bending, or physical changes. But the bottom line is, if you've got something happening down there that's got you worried or is affecting your life, then it needs to be looked at. So let me tell you about a man that I got to know, a man in his 50s who'd never had any trouble with his sex life at all. Maybe if he'd had a few drinks, then he'd be a bit slower, which is completely normal, right? But overall, he'd always been able to perform. But then life happened. Over the years, he became more distant with his wife, to the point where that distance became a divorce, which was sad, of course. But he didn't make that much of it at first because, he thought life goes on. But then he met someone he knew, someone he really liked, and someone he wanted to impress. And that's when things really started to go wrong for him. So he found himself struggling to get it up and keep it up. Not every time, but enough times that it became a thing, it became an issue. And the more he thought about it, the worse it got. And talking about it, forget it. He just wasn't that kind of guy. He wouldn't talk to her, let alone a doctor about it. So he ended up Googling it, researching it. He'd even found himself walking into a pharmacy on a couple of occasions, but just didn't work up the nerve to talk to the pharmacist about getting the little blue pill. So instead he bought them online. At first, they helped, kind of, but not reliably. Sometimes he'd get a headache, and sometimes they just wouldn't work. And it was starting to get to him now. He was starting to feel depressed, to the point where the people around him were noticing, and they said, "You've got to go to the doctor about it." So he did. Not about the erectile dysfunction, but about the low mood. And what ended up happening was he was prescribed an antidepressant, an SSRI. So he started that. And if anything, things got worse, to the point where he now needed to take Viagra every single time. And even then, it was hit or miss. But here's the interesting bit. He was still getting morning erections, not every day, but not bad for his age either. And he was able to get fairly firm erections when masturbating as well. So what does that tell us about the 4 parts of that erection machine? So being able to get good quality erections in certain circumstances, that says to me that the arteries and the blood flow can work properly. He can masturbate, so the wiring from the brain to the spine is probably intact, and he doesn't have diabetes or smoking or anything else that might cause an issue to the nerves or the arteries. So what's going on? Here is the first golden nugget. Even when it's not in your head, it's in your head. In this case, psychology played a massive part. He was in a new relationship, he was nervous, he was eager to impress, and probably trying too hard. And then that anxiety feeds itself as one failed attempt becomes a second failed attempt, and all of a sudden, it's a thing. And you start to dread it, you start to get anxious, and you start to second guess yourself. And that's what happened to him, and that killed arousal. Then he had the SSRI, the antidepressant, prescribed for his low mood, and that's a known cause of erectile dysfunction in some men. So now he's dealing with the performance anxiety and a medication that's blunting the response. So the spark was missing, but the system worked. But even if you say, let's say he had testosterone deficiency or an artery issue, and that was the cause of the erectile dysfunction, well, what's naturally going to happen there is the same thing, where you can't perform, so you get anxious about performing, and that just feeds and feeds into itself, which is why I say it's never just physical. But that brings me on to my second very important point. The penis is the window to the heart. I know that sounds odd, but here's what I mean. Let's say I told you the arteries in your body are starting to clog up and narrow. The worry is always a heart attack, right? But the arteries in the penis are smaller than the arteries in the heart. So the arteries in the penis should block before the arteries in the heart do, which is why erectile dysfunction might be a warning sign. A study published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology found that 70% of men who had a heart attack already had erectile dysfunction. And then if you look at it from the other way, men who develop erectile dysfunction often go on to have a heart attack 3 to 5 years later. Now, of course, having erectile dysfunction is far from being a guarantee that you're going to go on and have a heart attack. But if a man is coming into me with a gradual decline in the quality of his erections, and he has high cholesterol, high blood pressure, he's a smoker, I'm not just thinking erectile dysfunction and the penis. I'm thinking, is this a warning light on the dashboard? Is this his heart asking for help? And if it is, what are we going to do about it? So let's talk tests, options, and things you can try next. First, let's talk about sildenafil or Viagra and its cousins like tadalafil. Now, it might sound strange, but these pills don't actually trigger erection. So it's not like you take one at a funeral and boom, up it pops. You still need the system to be switched on both physically and mentally. And it just makes the process easier, last longer, and be harder by improving the blood flow. It's best taken on an empty stomach without alcohol about an hour before the activity. They're generally really safe to take, but if you are on certain drugs like nitrates or you've got certain heart conditions, it's best to check with a medical professional before taking them. But the big danger is you feel fixed without ever having found what was broken. And that's why the first and hardest step is to ask for help, because erectile dysfunction isn't just random. And although it's a bit more complicated than what I've portrayed so far, by and large, to find the cause, you look at that 4-part machine. Stress, anxiety, relationship issues, depression, all of these can not only affect erections, they can short circuit them altogether. And even when it's not the main problem, it's impossible for this not to get in your head and to have some form of psychological component. If the nerves are affected, you'll often notice problems across the board, not just sex, but masturbation and morning erections too. And neurological conditions like MS and Parkinson's and stroke can do it, but so can things like diabetes and alcohol. So the first step is to see if sugar is silently doing the damage and to start with a HbA1c blood test. This is the big one because erectile dysfunction can be a warning sign of something in the future happening to the heart. So you've got to get your blood pressure checked and your cholesterol. And then there's hardware issues, like if there's scarring on the penis or a prostate tissue. These can be checked out quite quickly with a physical examination, and consider having a PSA cancer test. But there is the final one, which I haven't really delved into much at all. The oil that keeps the whole system running smoothly, testosterone. Low testosterone is being missed across the board by so many doctors and so many men. And it's so important because it can affect our mood, our motivation, make us put on weight around here, can make our bones weak, and of course it can cause erectile dysfunction, and that's why I've made a whole video on it just here. And if you were listening, you might have heard me say the PSA test, which has a lot of flaws, but a lot of benefits too. And I've got a video here to tell you a little bit more about that if you want to watch it. Thanks very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.